This is Recruiters on the Rise, and I'm Colleen Gallagher. Join me for candid conversations with talent leaders as we explore the work that drives them, the lessons they've learned, and how they're helping people find careers they love. The show is sponsored by Lavalier, an interview intelligence platform built by Textio. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Recruiters on the Rise. I'm really excited for today's guest. He went from jumping out of planes in the 82nd Airborne to running every part of HR from Fidelity to Liberty Mutual and leading the HR side of a $2 billion PE deal. He walked away from corporate HR, so we'll talk about that. Joined a consultancy of 30 senior HR executives and hasn't looked back. He currently serves as the partner and principal at the Human Resources Consortium. Bruce Nichols, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk.
Yeah. So, obviously you've had a pretty broad experience working in HR, and we focus primarily on topics related to recruiting. So would love to hear from you based on your breadth of experience around this. What do you think makes the best recruiter?
I would say the best recruiter, like off the top of my head, right, I could point to him and talk to him any day. It was this guy over at Liberty who just knew the business. And it wasn't just, and I think all of us if we started recruiting or an HR function, we really want to get to know the business and understand how it makes money, does things. But he could just talk upside of the tech stack, down the other side of the tech stack, and have these conversations that would just blow me away. And as much as I thought I had this great acumen, I could talk to the CIOs and talk to some of these senior business leaders. He was just running circles around these conversations. And it wasn't just the fact that he could do that. And then he just knew instinctively, I got to go find this person or find this people, and he could source for them. And then he was looking out, like he always knew, okay, I knew this business or this group, there's going to be turn, it's going to be turnover. And he would just go get a source, and he would just keep filling that pipeline. And it was constant. Like you could just know, like Ron, I need somebody, and this is what it's going to look like. Yeah, I had that chat 2 or 3 weeks ago.
How do you think about that outside like technical roles? Do you think that is more specific to technical role recruiters or?
Yeah, it was apparent in the technical side because because it's so nuanced, and there's some, you have to understand, the differences in like software engineering and data engineering, machine learning. So there's so many different things to know, but I'm convinced that it doesn't have to be technology. I think you can do it in corporate functions. You could do it in finance. You could do it for a call center. I think it's more about understanding, what the needs of that business are. And from a recruiting perspective, it's, the best ones always knew how to source. They just knew strategically where to go get the right people for those jobs. And it was just a constantly filling of that funnel. So it was never a lag time and saying like, I'm going to open the job and I don't have candidates, I got to go look for them. It was just this constant proactivity. And I can go all the way back to my Fidelity days in recruiting for call centers. It was the same thing, like a constant turning of that source.
Yeah, I know you said before you don't care as much if the pipeline is full because you can fill it with garbage. So what do you care about instead? What do you look at?
Yeah, sometimes I say these things, and I'm like, yeah, I don't care about that. I just don't float. When I think about, especially on the technical side, I really want to know that, that we're representing culture, we're representing the company, and that, to me, it's like culture drives productivity. And you could go out there and find the best qualified candidates and have the best credentials. But if they don't fit the system or they're just not good for that culture, then you're wasting your time anyway. And some of the, most qualified candidates that I've seen come in through some of these doors were the worst hires. And it's because we didn't do that other part of the diligence process and making sure that they fit or understand how to fit into the culture.
I love that phrase. I wrote it down actually. Culture drives productivity. Can you say more about how you evaluate for that?
I think we all kind of go back, and so we have to have these open-ended questions and behavior-based interviewing. Not a fan, but I think a lot of it comes down to, you can do the assessments, you can pay thousands of dollars for each assessment for final client. And I've never been a big fan of any of that. I think really, as you're having these conversations from a recruiting perspective, especially, is getting to know that candidate, that applicant, and having dialogues about what's important to them, something outside of work, what drives them. And I think sometimes we do these things as because we want to be nice and generate conversation. But I think it's really important when you
Mhm.
reflect on it, I'm out there and I'm participating in the community. I'm out there and I do nonprofit work. I'm out there and this is how I fill my time. And I find some of the times when I had that best connection, I would say something like, I'm a big runner, or I like to go to the gym, or I'm playing tennis with my family and my wife, and they'll pop in with something. So I like to do this instead, or this is how I think about it. And this is what I do with my family or my community. And I think that helps kind of ease that conversation. Then you can get into the skills, but at least they have a personality, and then you can have that reflection. It's okay. This is why it's important for you to be able to have that conversation with the lead.
Yeah. I like the call out though there where you talk about making sure they have the skills because I think what, we at Textio have done a lot of research around is, people end up hiring people they like, which is okay if you like somebody as well, but you also need to make sure that they have the skills to do the job, and that probably speaks to what you said a lot of times, like the best person, on paper or that, gets through a process because everyone was like, "Oh, this person was great," and then they come in and they can't actually do the job is a big problem.
Yeah, it is a big I actually saw a senior leader at one of the companies I worked for, and he had this whole assessment thing built out for software engineers on a board, and he would have them come in and solve these complex problems, and they're writing out code, and he would have this fantastic conversation. He'd come back, well, that's the best candidate because they could fill all the answers in on the code. And I'm like, well, you're hiring for a software engineer 2 years out of school. They probably did all the coding. Like that's probably what their education was. So not surprised academically they could do that, but did you actually have a conversation with this person? Did you actually have a chat about, they're going to have to show up here Monday, Tuesday, maybe Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Maybe you talk about the environment, and inevitably we had a tremendous amount of turnover in that business because he was just hiring people because he felt comfortable with their technical skills. So there's a balance to that for sure. But I think we've seen a trend lately in recruiting and hiring and the HR processes where we're like, let's just get out there and find the person that we like the best. And we know this person and they're known commodity. And I really like, it's my nephew's son's brother's cousin 3 times removed. So they get the final interview no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of, companies or not a lot, but I've seen a number of posts on LinkedIn where people are talking about how they're just abandoning inbound and solely doing outbound. So how do you think about that?
I'm a big fan of LinkedIn anyway, because I think you can start that debate or any kind of debate on that topic. But I really think that from a recruiting perspective, yeah, I'm a fundamentalist at my core. Like, I think you have to focus on the basics. So inbound, outbound to me, I don't know that I have an opinion either way, but I think if you could do the basics and you can build your community and you can focus on the job, and I'm always like this people first, people centric mindset. And let's do the job right from a fundamentals perspective. And then let's start nuancing it into what fits into the strategy of the business.
I know switching more to like HR as a system, which you mentioned is one of the things you've said is that HR needs to shift from being sort of a policy police to being predictive. What does that actually mean in practice?
Small and mid-sized companies, I think a lot of business leaders, they get frustrated because they want less red tape. They just want something to work, and they just don't want to deal with, okay, I can and cannot do this, and my HR person is going to tell me no. And then when you kind of go up the scale and in size or in complexity of an organization, the argument sometimes is the same. And a leader wants to be able to run their business and know that they have a supporting function. And that holistic HR approach doesn't necessarily mean that we're here saying yes or no. Maybe it's providing that advice and consent and direction and what we've seen work best in the past. And then allowing the business leader to kind of make an educated decision based on expertise and based on your recommendation. So to me, we have to start shifting that mindset to more predictive analytics and predictive outcomes, and tying our strategy and especially recruiting. Like, if we're going to go out to the marketplace and look for people, and we should have that laid out or planned. Very hard to do over a 3 to 5 year period, but we should be able to look at skill sets that we need and the changing skill sets that we're going to need over time, and then kind of have a prediction of where that group is going to be, where we're going to find that source, and how we're going to attract them. I saw an organization moving large groups of systems admin, database administrators, and skill sets that we knew they weren't going to need out of their organization. And then we stopped and paused and we thought about that and said, okay, we know we have people that fit culture, so let's train the skills, because we know we need skills over the next 3 to 5 years. We know this is what we're going to be doing. So let's give them that opportunity to do that. So that system changes from let's cut here and go out and market and search. Well, and we can save money in that process. So automatically the HR is showing a return on that investment in the people, because we're not spending money to cut, spending money to hire, spending money to onboard. We have a group that's onboarded and culture trained into the organization. So we just have to update skills. And as long as we're providing that platform, that's how I think from a recruiting and talent management, talent acquisition standpoint, we should start thinking about things.
When you are working with these organizations, how are they thinking about, especially with how things feel like they're changing a lot and there's sort of a lot of uncertainty about where we're going? Like, what are the skills that they're trying to train people for that they need, 1, 2, 3 years down the road?
I've seen so much, and I think in a lot of different forms, like we hear the skills of the future and the changing of culture, but I think change, we all know this, we've heard it before, this change is constant. So outside of I think you can go into any type of skill set, like, you can go from call center to accounting and finance into technology and whatever. And I think the one thing that I'm seeing, adaptability, is what, like, that skill is the person's ability to adapt to change and to transform and then move ahead and learn something new is almost as important as the initial skills that we're hired for or they're going to learn.
Do you think organizations are doing a good job of assessing or identifying people who have that talent, or how are they even looking for it?
I really want to say no. I really do.
That's I mean, I wasn't trying to ask a leading question or anything, but like, I do think it's really difficult to, you know, that's why there's so many people chasing after skills assessments and things like that and trying to figure out, because like curiosity, dealing with ambiguity, adaptability are the things that everyone's really searching for right now.
Yeah. And not to kind of sell our services on this, but one of the things that we've started doing from a consultancy's perspective is looking at trust and adaptability. And from an assessment, so we have a retained search practice, and it's on top of our consultancy. And we have this really great tool developed by Dr. Larry Kuhn, and he's on our team, and he's been working on changing the typical assessment that we've all we've all seen, like the Hogans and all these other assessments that we're comfortable with. And he's written a new one that's focused on trust and the parameters and how you measure it. So you don't have like a 1 to 5. It's more like it's like a spectrum of the answer, and how you answer that doesn't mean it's necessarily good or bad, but it gives you a trust score, and then it allows other people to assess you from a trust and adaptability perspective. And it's very cool. So we're just now getting out to that. And I think I would like to say we do it well, but we haven't really done it yet. We're still testing it. But I think that's where companies need to go. And I don't see anybody else out there really doing that yet at holistically or well enough.
I mean, I think there's been news lately about, what was it, the Bolt CEO saying he, fired his whole HR team. So I think it goes back to this idea of, HR not as quote unquote policy police. Although, who know, I don't know anything about the interior workings of that organization, but my hunch as a leader is there's probably something more going on there. But how do you recommend or coach your, HR leaders or others to get into a trust and thought leadership position within an organization, especially when, a lot of the historical beliefs people have, and, I saw this in finance too, was, finance and HR are just like back office, and they should, sort of count the numbers and count the people and keep their mouths shut.
Yeah, and I'll come back to the Bolt piece of it too, because I'll see if I can tie it in. But my best lesson as an HR leader, I was the head of HR for a company called Wheelabrator Technologies, and I think I talked to you a little bit about this, and that was that $2 billion acquisition from Waste Management into private equity. And the harshest lesson I got out of it, and the most important lesson I got as an HR leader, was sitting with the CFO. And we were redesigning a total rewards and short-term incentive program and trying to build out this new thing that was going to be based on metrics, operational and financial metrics, EBITDA, and all these things. And I was stunned with the amount of and the level of detail that he went into to make sure that we were tying in the overall corporate structure and metrics into this HR program. And as he was walking me through this, and I always came out like I knew total rewards, I knew compensation, I've done those jobs before, and then all of a sudden I'm like, this is a whole new level of things. And I would say, like, anybody in HR that wants to sit in that seat going forward, spend time with the CFO and just sit there and observe, listen, learn, spend some time understanding the financial operations of the business, and then wash, rinse, repeat with the COO. And I say that because the COO of that same company, as we're going through this deal, grabbed me by the back of the collar and we ran out into a power plant and we stood in a pile of mud and muck as a steam pipe burst and spread ash and chemicals and everything, all over the place. And I was in my brand new Brooks Brothers suit that my wife wanted me to look nice in for the private equity board. And I was covered in mud and slush. And he's like, this is why we have to have talent planning. And this is why this is important, because if we had made a decision a few months ago and actually hired for the right manager for this role, we wouldn't be in this space. And he's pointing at me and I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about right now. All I see is soot and ash and craziness. And I'm like, that tied everything together for me right there. And that was that hire. I don't blame the recruiting team at all. It's not them. It was me and not being on the same page with that COO and not allowing, the right decision to be made from a talent strategy perspective. And that cost us a lot of money. And well, fortunately, like, we were able to fix it quickly and didn't destroy the deal. But that's an example of how I think about it now.
I mean, I think it's so true. I started I have an undergrad degree in finance, and my first job out of college, I worked for PwC and had to do a lot of invoice testing. And I learned so much about how companies operate by being able to look at like an invoice to see like what are they billing for, how are they collecting it. Then we would look at like the costs associated. Like it was such a good way to understand it was some of the most basic stuff, but it gave me a really fundamental understanding of like how does a company bill and collect money. And then as I matured in my career, like one of the CEOs I worked with used to say like, and this isn't novel, but it's been a thing that I think about a lot, is like the definition of strategy is how you allocate money. And I brought in it a little because I think it's like it's how you bring together the allocation of, you know, it was, I think more of what he was speaking to was resources, but especially now, and it reaffirms what you were talking about, which is like, if you know how to bring, I've expanded the definition to include time, because you have limited amounts of time, you have limited amount of resources, and it's like really how you make the priorities amongst all of those things. But if you can sit in a seat and help, and that's really where I think HR leaders can be such a powerful resource, and why a lot of CFOs have moved into that seat is because they see a lot of that.
Exactly. That CFO in particular, I had actually made a pitch at one point. I'm like, why don't I just come and report to you and which was not what I wanted to do, whatever, but I was learning so much about that operation and how the company operated that I was like, I was excited to go in and learn something that I hadn't done before. Obviously that wasn't the right answer. And I don't believe that HR needs to report into a finance function, but, and that's a whole nother topic for a different podcast, I believe. But when I sat back and thought about this, that was the key point of my coming of age, I guess, in the HR leadership function, is understanding not just showing up and having all these different silos, but really stepping back and thinking about, okay, I have to hire somebody. We have to bring them into the organization. We have to onboard them, and we have to do it in a way that doesn't below the budget. And now that I understand the financial aspects of the business and why the budget is important, tying that all together and kind of making that argument over time, it just made better sense. So I wasn't sitting in a room full of leaders looking at me saying, why don't I have budget for my head count that I need this year? And I'm like, well, let's look at the financials. Let's look at your metrics. Let's at how you operate. Let's look at your turnover. Maybe we should stop the turnover from hiring before you accost our recruiting team on needless recs. Let's really put some thought into it.
How do you think about or have you seen companies do well, like quality of hire, like this concept of tracking the
Yeah.
the right, whether or not the person you hired is the right person?
Yeah, the quality of hire. I've seen those metrics and I've seen them out and about in a few different companies. And I don't know that we word it correctly because I want to go with like time to productivity or revenue per employee or something that kind of says, I've been here for X number of days or weeks or months or whatever it is, and now I am productive, and this is how long it should have taken. So that's the quality of your hire. And short-term turnover, I think we're always going to have to deal with that. But as we're bringing somebody in the company, we should have an idea of how long that person takes to come valued back to the return on that investment. So I guess sales would be the easiest way to point it. Like if you're hiring a salesperson and they have to learn the business, the culture, learn the product, and then move on, you should be able to show a return on that at some point and say, okay, now they're officially productive.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the challenge is like, as I've spent more time working with folks in the HR space, being a Textio, obviously, but there are a lot of finance metrics, but they're
Yeah.
much more easy to calculate, right? You know what your gross margins are, you know what your EBITDA is, for the most part, what your cost is, even when you look at like ramping sales people, right? Like there's a pretty um, easy calculation of that, but it gets so hard once you're moving into a space. Like I agree, I like the like revenue per employee or time to productivity, but I think like the challenge with time to productivity is it really requires the hiring manager to understand what that means,
Yeah.
and I don't know if everyone does.
No, I don't think they do. And I think so that's a prime area for an HR person to start digging in. Like, what does it mean? And what does that time frame look like? And laying out the framework for that, partnering with finance, partnering with the management team, and just trying to get underneath that and helping them build that metric out because it could change based on the function, it could change based on the company. Um, there may be functions you should be able to show up day one and be productive because it's a task that says, okay, move this box from here to here, put it here to here, and you're productive. And then the other organizations where there's a long ramp up time, there's testing or assessments involved, there's a long onboarding track. I know I've seen a couple large investment companies that, they bring college hires in. They have a really robust program. They test them and to make sure they have the acumen and intelligence to pass those tests that they need to test for and pass. And then they have this huge ramp up time to make sure that they're trained and then they're productive. It might take 6 to 9 months for them to be truly productive. It's cheaper to do it that way than to actually keep filling them up with new seats, filling new seats up with new people.
I know you've spent a lot of time in mergers or acquisitions. Um, you talk about CEOs fearing organ rejection after an acquisition. What do you see? What have you seen go wrong or go right?
Some of the toughest ones I've seen are acquisitions where the cultures are so diverse and so different and that you kind of take them in and say, okay, this is what we do and this is how we do it and this is the new company, so you adapt or go away. um and I think I think that's the organ rejection of we you know I one of the power plants I remember going through the acquisition for, and we divested one, acquired another, and as we were going through this process, I just remember having to go up to this plant on a regular basis and talking to local managers and being part of that transition on the ground where I had HR leaders, we had leaders from the business, we had a lot of operations people there that should have been able to do that. But what we were finding in that, and one of the lessons I learned there is that we didn't spend enough time, understanding the culture they were leaving, even though it was the same industry, of what was important to them, why it was important, and simple things like I have this number of hours to break, or this amount of time to come in the morning, or this amount of time to get onto the floor, and simple twists or changes in that process changes that in that culture just so slightly, and then you have a little bit of an organ rejection. Even it could even mean I get 15 less minutes to do a task, and um, closing those gaps and communicating what those gaps are and how you're going to rectify and bring them closer together. And then inside that also, we did a lot of time on like compensation and benefits and things that, touch the pocket of this is what you got before, this is what you're getting now. And here's the difference between the two. And here's why it's not too bad.
Yeah. I remember I was part of we had done an acquisition when I was at a company, and as part of it, there were going to be some headcount changes and some people impacted. And it was a very awkward meeting. But honestly, the thing that I sort of heard back from everyone afterwards was, and this division had been through a number of acquisitions, it had changed hands, I believe, a number of times. And they were like, no one's ever really just like talked with us about it. And even though it didn't change the outcome for them, at least made them feel seen. And, you know, it was a simple thing to do, but it was hard, but I felt super uncomfortable doing it.
I can remember a few times going through different processes like that. And what I always came back to is let's treat people as adults. I think HR and business leaders, they're over indexed on security and risk and trying to make sure that the word doesn't get out, and we're creating unnecessary noise and people are going to be nervous and we don't want to have litigation. Instead, what, being able to step back on this a couple times, um, being able to communicate with people and say, this is as much as we can give you now. We're going to give you more when we can, but this is the impact of it. And I saw one leader, he called it his transformational journey. And it was basically taking whole groups of people and saying, listen, you may not have a job this time next year. And this is what it looks like over that year. Just in it, being honest with them, say, I'm going to do everything I can to help you along this journey. But if you're sitting in this seat, this is what to expect. And this is the timeline we're operating under. And these are the conditions we have to do it on. And then we would have these regular updates. And sometimes we get criticized because you can't do that. You can't tell these people you're going to hurt culture. But one of the things we ended up doing or finding is that our culture, and I'm not a big fan of like ENPS and measuring culture that way. All the questions are always the same, but our scores never dipped. And as a matter of fact, when we started looking at the comments we were getting, the comments actually were a lot more favorable because they're like, thank you for being honest and letting us know and be able to plan and think about this. And, operating with a little bit of empathy, a little bit of understanding, you have to have that decisiveness. But operating a little decisive and a little bit of humility, mixing in the empathy. And so that goes a long way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that creates the most anxiety and discomfort is the lack of like control and understanding, right?
That's that authenticity and that trust. And that's why I think that's kind of going back to our previous part, is that building of trust and authenticity and being able to migrate through that a little bit and adaptability is so much more important right now.
I mentioned at the top of the show that you started out after, coming out of school, out of airplanes, and then now you're in HR. So tell us a little bit more about that journey.
I never thought in a million years I'd be in this seat. I was for sure, I was going to get my commission. I was going to serve my 20, 25 years. And then I was going to retire and work at like a Home Depot driving a fork truck at night. That was I was so excited. That was my career goals. Um, I had a jump, got hurt. I was recently married and hadn't seen my wife in about a year. Just recently had left the army also. And we just made a decision. We're like, let's not do this. And I was horrified. I mean, and I was scared because I didn't know what was I had a degree in accounting actually. Um, and I had no, I didn't want to be an accountant. I just figured that was better than having a market. I just figured I'll do this instead of that. And I woke up one day, we packed up the car and we just drove and we left. I had resigned my commission, got a nice deal, out the door we went, and, I mean, there's a lot more to it behind it. And then, I got into recruiting, and, I was actually working as a finance guy, reconciling inventory accounts for Sun Microsystems, which I think is now part of, or was part of, Oracle or whatever it was, and, I was miserable, walked into an office for, I think it was Robert Half at the time in their accountants division. I'm like, "I can't do this. This is stupid. I hate it." They're like, "Well, come do this instead. Try this out." And I just fell in love with that process. And then, what's funny is I remember going through that and, finding my way over to Fidelity as a contract recruiter, thinking I would start my own search firm. I had a couple things going on at the same time, doing like an HR consulting, a recruiting consultant type thing for a little bit. Um, and then got tapped on the shoulder by one of the HR execs, say, You've done a good job recruiting. I already talked to the recruiting director. You start Monday. You're going to be the HR manager over there. Congratulations." I'm like, I didn't even interview for the job. I don't think, I don't even know what happened. And I just knew coming out of the army and then spending my few years in recruiting, I was doing everything I can to avoid HR people because they kept getting in the way. Um, so here I am in that seat trying to figure out how not to be in the way. So, and the rest was kind of history. I following it back, and I don't know why I ever regret it. I just really question how.
How does the time you spent in the Army influence, like, how you lead or how you think about work?
The first lesson I learned was humility, and I remember, well, a few weeks before commissioning, the gentleman, retired sergeant major from the army. He was with one of the Ranger battalions, a Vietnam vet, and was the hardest, toughest, grizzled guy I'd ever met in my life. And I'm terrified of him in this day. And he's almost 80. And his name is John Mott, and I would never even call him John now. And he'll call me tomorrow and be like, "What are you talking about?" But I said something really snarky to him because I tend to be a little cynical, a little snarky sometimes. And I said, "Sergeant Major, you're going to have to salute me in a few weeks. So you might as well just check that attitude at the door." And I just remember the next thing I knew, I remember laying on my back in a pile of mud with him kneeling on my chest. And he's pointing at me. He's like, "You're not going to get out of this career alive." And I'm like, "Oh." I mean, so not getting, and so that double meaning haunts me. It still does. Like I remember like it was yesterday because going into the military and going to the 82nd Airborne Division, and that was a dangerous job. So there was a chance I was not going to get out of that alive, especially with a bad attitude. But also, like, not being that kind of snippy, egocentric. I, you know, uh, I needed that humility lesson, and he gave it to me, and I've carried it forward. So sometimes I do look back on that and I chuckle, but man, I don't forget it ever.
One question I like to ask is, like, if you, met yourself a couple days after graduation, what advice would you give?
Shut up and read a book. Yep. Stop talking. Um, I just had it. I mean, I still do. I have an opinion about everything. I have a thought about everything, and I can just talk my way in circles around any topic and convince myself I'm right. And I think and I still learn that humility lesson every day. Like I'm constantly reminded that there's somebody smarter, bigger, faster, strong, whatever. And I have a 23-year-old daughter that reminds me of that too. And she's legitimately a lot smarter than I am. So I don't hold that as a grudge, but I would tell myself, stop. Just stop and think and learn that lesson faster.
I love that. What do you do for fun?
I wish I could show you, but it's all over the place. It depends on my mood, but I love doing like puzzles and thinking and stopping. And because, I am always busy and I'm always on the go. Like I don't have this personality that shuts down. My wife actually has bought me like 50, 60 different puzzles and they're stacked in a corner. And on a regular basis, we'll bring one out and she'll be like, "It's puzzle time. Let's do this."
I'm sure everyone appreciates hearing about those. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I loved, your perspective, especially around, I'm a little biased, obviously, because I have a background in finance as well, but I think your advice around really just getting to understand the fundamentals of a business to make everyone a better leader in HR, and frankly, no matter what role you're in, is spot on. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
And thanks to everyone who is listening. If you learned something today or laughed, please tell somebody about this podcast. Thank you again to Bruce. And one last question: where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
LinkedIn is my go-to, but I'm with the Human Resources Consortium. It's dhrc.com. Be up there and shoot me a note.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us. This has been another exciting episode of Recruiters on the Rise. We will see you all next time. And that wraps up another episode. Thank you for joining. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at recruitersontherise.com. Recruiters on the Rise is sponsored by Lavalier, an interview intelligence platform. Lavalier goes beyond basic note takers to improve your ability to assess candidates with AI-powered interview questions, summaries, and transcription. With Lavalier, you can finally hire with speed and confidence.